So this has been a challenging last few days for me because to be honest, I haven't really I gave you the title and the abstract, and then don't really know what to talk about. This is the honest truth. I came here being like, I'll figure it out. I'll slowly come together, and I've been adding things to my slides over the last few days, and I even sent the slides over, and I thought, you know what? No, to hell with the slides. There's enough bullet points, enough intellectual, enough cerebral talking going on as it is in academia. So I just want to chuck all that out. We've been talking a big game about emotions and storytelling. We haven't really been doing it, right? We've still been coming up here on this podium as our nice little intellectuals and talking about our ideas, and it's all so well structured and so impressive. But where's the emotion? And we talk about compassion, these sweet, gentle little emotions, compassion and empathy. What about fucking anger? What about anger? I'm pissed off. And I don't even know exactly why I'm pissed off, but I am pissed off. And I thought I'm going to try to do something with that and talk to you from that place, talk to you from a real, honest, place from my gut. And so I thought I got to start with storytelling because that is how, our brains work. It's how we process information. It's how we make sense of the world. So I'll tell you a little bit about my personal story, and maybe we can together figure out why I'm so pissed off. So I am the child of Indian and Pakistani immigrants, born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, first generation, what they called a third culture child. At the time I was being raised, there was not a lot of Indian Pakistani people in the Bay Area. There's a lot now. My younger cousins have a lot of people who are the same ethnicity. I didn't. And I always felt a bit lost. The Hispanic kids had their sort of Hispanic friends, and the Black kids had their Black friends, and the Asian kids had their friends. And I was a little bit kind of in the middle. And yes, the US is multicultural, and yes, we all hang out and talk to each other, but there's still this kind of tribalism as well that happens in the United States. People do of similar skin color kind of hang out with each other. And so that's a real phenomenon. So I was always a bit lost. I didn't really know who I was or where I belonged. And my friends used to call me the sponge. That was my nickname, the sponge. And they would call me the sponge because I just absorbed the personality of whoever I was around. I would start laughing like the person I was around. I would start figuring out their sense of humor. I would start to mimic them unconsciously. I think it was probably a way to get liked, but I also discovered, hey, maybe I can actually act, and maybe I'm a decent actor. And that's actually what I did. That's what I was professionally, how I began my life and my career was as a professional actor. And I went to conservatory, and I was acting off Broadway fairly early. I think I was probably 19, 20 years old. I was acting off Broadway. And I was lucky enough to do a play that had some famous actors in it, one of them being Robin Williams. And one day after a performance, I go down to Robin Williams' dressing room, and I was kind of shy, and I'm asking him if he can call my mom because she's a big fan of his work. And Robin Williams was a strange person. If there's 2 or 3 people in the room, he was exactly like you've seen him on TV. He was a performer, he was theatrical, but one-on-one, he was one of the most awkward people. Like, he wouldn't look you in the eye. He was awkward to be in an elevator with. You just never really wanted to be alone with the guy. You just didn't know how to interact with humans, it seemed like, on a one-on-one level. And that's why I never really wanted to talk to him, but I did go down and have this one conversation. And I said, listen, I'm young, I'm 20, 21 years old. I don't remember exactly. I don't really know what I want to do with my life. And I'm acting, and that's going well, but I'm not really sure. And he said, well, what else do you want to do? I mean, you're already acting off Broadway. You seem like you're going to have a pretty good career here. I said, I'm interested in neuroscience. I'm interested in psychology. I'm interested in, humans. And then he was looking me in the eye up until now, right? Because he was an awkward, shy guy. And all of a sudden, he looked me in the eye, and it was the first time through rehearsals, through the whole time I'd been working with him, that I actually saw him in a one-on-one situation making eye contact with someone. And he just became alive. And I didn't realize that he was such a neuroscience nerd, actually. He loved the brain and wanted to talk about it. He goes, Nafees, you have to do this. If you have an interest in this, you have to do this. And he was saying, he wanted this beautiful speech, and I'm not going to do justice to it, but he was saying, he goes, what are we as actors? We're storytellers. And what's happening through the history of the world for thousands of years, when you look at all the violence and all the ways in which people are killing each other, what are they killing each other? A lot of it is stories. we are killing each other over differences of stories. And if you go into those different stories, the religions, the philosophies, the cultures, what you find is oftentimes the stories are grounded on some basic assumptions of human nature. Are we inherently good? Are we inherently bad? Do we have original sin? Do we have innate goodness? Are we a blank slate? Whatever it may be. Do we have a spirit or a soul, or are we just our material selves that when we die, and that's the end of it? And we haven't been able to answer these questions, and whole myths have been built around them, and people have killed each other over these myths. And now, for the first time in human history, we get a window into the brain, and we can start answering slowly, coming to some sort of more realistic conception of human nature. And maybe we can actually start to come up with a new myth and a new story that can come out of that can be told. That is at least a little bit based on some scientific understanding of who we are. So you can imagine a 21-year-old kid, we're listening to this speech from Robin Williams, who hasn't looked me in the eye once over the course of the whole show. I'm like, God damn. Okay, I guess I'll go in that direction. And so then that's sort of my career in cognitive science. And funny enough, it was at the first inaugural meeting in 2013, the first CRIC meeting that I met Scott Atran. I was telling him about how, I did all this cognitive science degrees and I studied moral psychology, and he was very, he was, okay, great. And then he found out that I was an actor, and that lit him up, and he said, okay, come work with me. And let's get out there and let's go talk to some terrorists and let's go talk to some other people and scan their brains and see what's going on inside their heads. And so we did the brain scans. I'm not gonna really talk about the brain scans here. I want to talk about where I think my anger is coming from a little bit. Because I started off talking to these mostly Western youths who went and joined ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other groups. Then I moved over to neo-Nazis, mostly here in the UK. And now over Zoom, I've been talking to a lot of conspiracists, people who are members of QAnon. Left-wing and right-wing people, mostly Americans, but some of them live in California, a lot of them live in Bali, because there's a lot of left-wing people who are part of QAnon too, yogis, people who are part of the spiritual New Age community. People oftentimes think of QAnon as this very right-wing movement, and it is. There's a lot of right-wing people in it, but there's a lot of far left-wing people in it as well. And I listen to them and I hear what they're saying, and obviously I don't agree, and I am able to tap into some of my acting skills when engaging with them, because I think one of the skills an actor has is that you can completely dissociate, completely separate your empathy from your sympathy. You can have 100% empathy. You could play Osama bin Laden, you could play Hitler, you could play serial killers, the most evil characters, and completely embody them with full empathy. And in that moment, when you're saying those lines, you're feeling it in your cells, what that person is feeling. But of course, you have no sympathy. And people will, every interviewer, every critic, every time I played some evil character would come up and say, does playing this evil character affect you? And every actor has to deal with this in interviews. And they all say, no, it doesn't affect me. I don't walk away thinking in more evil ways. And it never happened to me either with talking to any of these extremists. All my empathy never translated into any sympathy. It didn't really shift my ideas in terms of their solutions for the problem. But I realized I did have some sympathy for their acknowledgement of what the problems were. And I realized again and again when I would talk to people, I didn't have an alternative for their very legitimate grievances. And I couldn't find what Western liberal democratic societies could offer these people to their very legitimate grievances. And there's so many different stories that I can give you, so many different examples, but the basic idea was, you know what? I'll give you an actual story. This is a friend of mine. I won't use his real name, but he when we were living in Paris, we lived in Paris. He was my flatmate in Paris. He was 19 years old. I was 27 years old, and I kind of like this almost big brother, younger brother relationship with him. In the last few years, he's gone full QAnon. You know, he's completely into it. We've had multiple long 3-hour-long conversations on Zoom, and he let me record it, and I might even be putting it up on YouTube, and he said I could. And I was trying to really get it, like, how did you, this young, fun-loving guy, 19 years old, just adopt such a bizarre, ideology? And I guess most people here know what QAnon is, and kind of generally there's a deep state cabal of celebrities and politicians who have a sex trafficking ring. connected with Jeffrey Epstein and drink the blood of children, are actually controlling the world, a secret Illuminati and oligarchy of the powerful. And Donald Trump was basically someone who came from outside the swamp to take them on and to crush them. And again, the new age left-wing people also think Donald Trump was actually their hero, their savior. So I said, how did you, and it took us a long time to figure out together how he got to this place. And he started telling this interesting story. He says, because Nafees, look, my father was a hoarder. So he lives in Idaho. Because my father was a hoarder. Because we had 10,000 ammunition. We had 20 guns hanging out in the back. We had all these, soup cans, and we were ready for the zombie apocalypse if it happened. If there was a full civil war, we were prepared and ready for it. He had a lot of anxiety, and he said about himself, because I had a lot of anxiety. He said, I remember your anxiety. I remember when we were living in Paris, we went on a trip to Morocco. He was freaking out that every single Moroccan person was gonna like kidnap him or rob him or something. And I had to go buy him a leather jacket from the tanneries at Fez, and he thought it made him look more Moroccan having it on. He called it his Harry Potter cloak of Muslim invisibility. He said, like, okay, I'm disguised here. They don't know I'm a whitey. And he was like, yeah, and he was like, of course, yeah, that's it. I'm full of anxiety. I'm always looking for the worst possible scenario in every situation, and it freaks me out. And then, and he had a job. He was a financial planner. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, he lost his job. He had a girlfriend, an older girlfriend he was very in love with. She broke up with him. His father, he had a very complicated relationship with, died right at the beginning of the pandemic. He couldn't go back and even see his family because of the lockdown measures. And so he was just sitting in his apartment all the time. And he has a distaste and hate for media, sort of an innate sort of or initial distrust of media in general. So he was watching YouTube videos, and he was watching Jordan Peterson videos, and he was watching Ben Shapiro videos. And then the algorithm of YouTube from watching those videos took him down this wormhole where he said the very first video actually was a QAnon video, but he said it was too out there for him to even comprehend. So then he had to go back and do like fake moon landing and JFK and 9/11 being an inside job, kind of the easier, the gateway conspiracies that seem to be a lot more plausible to people. Then you start moving on to aliens, and then eventually you can get to QAnon, because now you've been slowly primed after being a part of this community where if you believe the moon landing could have been fake, if you believe 9/11 could have been an inside job, if you believe that they're hiding aliens, then a deep state cabal doesn't actually seem like that crazy of an idea at that point. And of course, he's just on YouTube and he's reading, he's watching the videos, and there's a whole community and a sense of belonging there. And he finally says to me, he goes, Nafees, okay, maybe all this stuff is wrong, but believing in it makes me feel safe. It gives me a map to the territory. It gives me contingency points. It's the equivalent of my dad's den with the guns and the cans of soup and everything in there. Because if the world is as complex as you say it is, as I say it is to him, where it's all this complexity and all this moving parts, and there's no real one person or any group of people in control, and there's competition, and all the things that we're seeing is emerging out of that complexity, and there's no sort of orchestrating group, because if that's the way the world really is, I can't plan for that world. I don't know where the bad guy is going to come from. I don't know how to protect myself. I had no strategy, no solution. I'm unsafe. I'm scared and I'm anxious of that world. At least QAnon, even if it's wrong, gives me that sense of control again, and calms my anxiety down, and allows me to sort of just move on and live my life. It's sense making. It gives me sense of the world. And I realize that's probably true of what a lot of moderate religions, provide to people as well. I think that's probably what a lot of people want from philosophy. They want it from ideology. And that's kind of the problem with the Enlightenment and liberalism, right? It sort of tries to present itself as the absence of an ideology to some degree, right? Saying, the Enlightenment is basically saying that we're going to free the individual to use their own autonomous reasoning, to be able to come to their own conclusions about things, and to be unobstructed by what the government is telling you is the truth, or what authority is telling you, or what superstition or religion or culture, or even your parents are telling you. John Locke famously said that even a child has to consent to the relationship with the parent, that there is no actual real authority, innate real authority. He said there is kind of an innate authority. There's a value-based authority, but no innate authority is what he actually said. So all relationships, friends, family, duty to culture, religion, it's all up for grabs to some degree, right? That you can use reasoning to get away from all of it. And it encouraged it. That you are an independent thinker if you're doing that. You are a critical thinker. You are a virtuous person, actually, if you're going to go out there on your own and be a, what in reality is a leaf blowing in the wind. But the perception that, or the story that you're going to be told is that you have agency and power and control, and there's something within you that's self-directing. And of course, we know that that's not true, from the modern cognitive sciences and everything we now know about human nature and psychology. We're incredibly influenced by everything around us, from unconscious factors, how much sleep I got, how much coffee I had this morning has no effect. Maybe that's why I'm angry. Maybe I just had too much coffee. Who knows, And I'm coming up with all sorts of great, elaborate explanations over here. It's an entertaining story, so I don't mind, pitching and framing it that way. But it's just, we don't really know what's going on in our own minds. We don't really have introspective insight. This is one thing that the split brain studies showed us, the famous split brain studies, where people who had the corpus callosum cut between their left brain and the right brain, the left brain had language, and so they were able to continue to explain things that were presented to the left hemisphere. So like you would close one eye and you would show an image or something, or you would say something in someone's ear saying like, raise your hand. You would say it into the right ear because that would communicate with the left brain. The person would then raise their hand. Sorry, in the left ear because it would communicate to the right brain, which is the part that doesn't have the language. And then they would raise their hand, and then they would say, okay, why'd you raise your hand? And the person would say, oh, I think I saw someone walking over there. And they would just confabulate a reason, and they believed it because the explanation part of the brain, the part that is able to come up with these stories was the left part, whereas the information was being given to the right part of the brain, and the right and the left weren't connected, so the left didn't actually know. It was literally the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. It's a literal example of that. And so it confabulates an explanation. So we sort of started realizing from that, okay, we have what we think is our deep introspective insights, what we think is our reasoning may not in fact actually be our reasoning. It's just justifications. It's post hoc justifications that we're coming up that we're telling ourselves to explain things to ourselves, but it's not really the case. And hitting on that left brain, right brain divide, Ian McGill-Christ is someone I would like, whose work I'd like to talk a little bit about. I know, John, you're familiar with him. It was actually Liam Kavanagh, who's with us today, who originally introduced me to that, to his ideas. 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Okay. The left brain, this idea of a left brain and right brain fell into disrepute because it just became this weird caricature that was being shared sort of culturally. But actually, there is a real difference between the left brain and the right brain, and they serve different purposes, different functions for human reasoning. The left brain is a bit more on the analytical side. It's there for problem solving. It's there for sort of what we would consider analytic reasoning, as well as language. It's very good at domain-specific tasks as well. The right brain is much more big picture. It's the context. It's the connectivity. It's that much more mysterious sort of understanding of the world. There was a famous neuroscientist, I don't remember her name, but she actually got like a seizure in the left brain, so she would have overactivation in the right brain, and she would have these deep, profound spiritual experiences with the overactivation of the right brain. And a lot of psychedelics, a lot of spiritual experiences actually do come from more right brain activity. And I'll give you just an example of the difference between them. If you look at lesion studies, a person who has right hemispheric damage, so their left brain is basically fine, you ask them to draw an elephant. And they'll draw, the ear and the tail, and then, the tusk and the legs in great detail. But it won't look anything like an actual elephant. They won't actually be able to connect the parts of the tail is over here, the tusk is right next to it, the ear and the foot are right next to each other. There's no actual elephant. It's all the specific components of an elephant, but not connected. Whereas someone who has a left lesion, left hemisphere lesion, and so it's more of the right brain, you ask them to draw an elephant, there's poor details, but there's a big picture. There's the picture of the elephant actually starts to emerge. And so Ian McGill-Christ argues that, in the West, we've kind of overvalued this analytic, this left side. We've become too left-brained. And we've kind of, it sort of uses the analogy master and his emissary, that's the title of his book even, that the left brain was supposed to be the ambassador, it was supposed to be the emissary, and the right was supposed to be the master who actually has the big picture. But we've actually reversed it in the Enlightenment. We've actually given this left part of the brain that's really just supposed to be almost a mouthpiece, problem solver, communicator, persuader, the actual, keys to the car, basically, and say, okay, you go run the show now. And he's not really equipped to run the show, that part of you. And so I actually think that this is connected to why some people get radicalized. And if you look at it, you see a lot of people with engineering degrees, very left lateralized, very much left part of the brain that's active, but they're also the people who are most likely to get sucked into an extremist group. Right-wing or jihadi group. Stephen Hertog, Daniel Gambetta wrote the book Engineers of Jihad. They actually provided empirical evidence for that. And people from humanities and arts and philosophy background are the least likely to actually get pulled into extremist groups. And you can control that for all sorts of other factors. And there have been follow-up psychology studies done, and they find out that there's this need for cognitive closure, which is a very left analytic side of the brain way of thinking. Like, I need my answers. As long as we can agree on the suppositions, I can get you from A to B. And that's what the left brain is good at. But if you don't agree on the actual suppositions, and the suppositions themselves are all open to debate, which is what the artists and the humanities and the philosophies want to debate about, well, then you can't even leave point A. You're just stuck there debating, dealing with sort of the underpinning actual issues. So I think what happens, and with a lot of these extremists, is that I think they're more sort of left brain. They can really talk in great, amazing detail about very specific economic injustices in the world. They can go into their conspiracies. They can be very articulate and explain specific problems. But what they're not good at is connecting those actual specific problems into the big picture. In a sense, they're very good at drawing the little elephant, the elements of the elephant, but there's no picture of an elephant emerging. And this creates confusion and anxiety and uncertainty. And that's when an extremist group comes in, because they come in with the picture. They connect the dots. Only it's not an actual elephant, it's some Salvador Dali looking elephant where, the tail is coming out of the butt and the eye is on the foot or something, because they're constructing something that's not actually necessarily accurate. QAnon is not coming up with an accurate picture, neither is ISIS or neo-Nazis coming up with an accurate picture, but it's a certain picture. It's taking all of these elements that people know are there and just finding some sort of coherence. So again, like my friend, it gives them a sense of peace. It calms them down. It gives them certainty again. And that's I'm just going to quickly hit on critical thinking, only because I think Lydia is still here. Maybe is she? I can't tell. Well, yeah. So I mean, she rightfully went after this. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up. She rightfully went after this this false notion of critical thinking, that people think we're going to actually, solve the world's problems through. It goes back to the Enlightenment, right? The individual person, we're just going to equip them with these analytic skills. We're going to make them to think critically. Well, first of all, it seems like a lot of people are defining critical thinking by its exact opposite, just called motivated reasoning, right? It's the ability to actually come up with great arguments and knowledge and spew it out there. But in reality, that's just, you're still using your reasoning capacities like a lawyer arguing for your own biases and your own in-group. Critical thinking is supposed to be, you're using these capacities to argue against your own thinking and against your own in-group's ideology. But here's the problem. That's not an actual individual attribute. That comes out of the social environment. Take a scientist, for example. A scientist may be absolutely a great critical thinker in the lab. Why? Is it because they're so educated and they have PhDs and they've been so well groomed individually? Maybe a little bit, maybe that part plays a part. But I would actually argue that there's systemic incentives for the scientist to be a good critical thinker in the lab. Why? Because you want to get published. You want to get published in Nature or Science or these big journals. And the way you're going to do that is you need to think, what will the reviewers of those journals say about my methodology and my ideas and so forth? And I need to take that into account right now while designing my study, so that way it can already foresee the counter arguments and put all that into the paper, so that way I can get the big publications, I can get the big grants, so I can move forward. That person is systemically incentivized through social rewards to use their faculties, their analytic faculties, in a self-directed way. However, when that same scientist goes out for Taco Tuesday with their friends and has some tequilas, is probably not going to be engaging in that same level of critical thinking against all their friends' political and moral belief systems, right? It's probably going to sit there and with them start complaining about how evil Donald Trump is and how all Trump voters are just stupid and racist and so forth. Why? Because now in that social context, there's a social incentive to do that. the more you share these kinds of strong moral values, share moral outrage, share those feelings of discontent, share the same story, the closer your friendship becomes with these people, the more connected you feel to these people, the more they're going to give you a sense of psychological safety. And so the more you can actually tolerate the uncertainty of the world. So the incentives of a social group, of a friend network, is very much one of not encouraging critical thinking. People don't want to hang around with the one friend who's actually somehow defending Donald Trump or his voters and trying to bring nuance. That person's annoying. You don't want to get drunk with that person. You're going to be challenging all your own sacred beliefs. And so it's not that the individual person, it's the same person. They have the same critical thinking faculties at an individual capacity level, but they're finding themselves in different situations that have different rewards built into it. And of course, we have to think about social media and think about all social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, they all basically have four incentives, four systemic incentives, right? It's reactions, comments, shares, follows, right? Those are the four gamifications of social media. And we know what it leads to. It leads to a lot of in-group thinking. It leads to virtue signaling. It leads to moral outrage, and it makes people fall into echo chambers. So I think we need to start thinking less about how do we make people good critical thinkers, but how do we create spaces? How do we create environments, whether it's online or offline, where the systemic incentives are one, where you are given points, you are given rewards for actually arguing against yourself, for showing doubt, for challenging your in-group. I don't have the answer of exactly what that gamification system would look like, but we need to be thinking of how can we create a situation where it's enjoyable for a person to go on, and they will increase their followers, they will increase their likes, they will get more and more positive reactions by challenging in-group thought. So I'll just stop there. And what I can tell you is I'm a lot less angry. So thanks for listening to me.